2005 Nissan Xterra valve covers are leaking. I'm Brian Eslick from How To Automotive, and I'm going to show you how to replace those. So before we get started, I wanted to share with you that to do this job, you're going to need to order the valve covers itself. You can get it aftermarket. In this case, we actually got them from the dealer. I'm going to show you the part numbers. There's the part number for the valve covers, and this is for the opposite cylinder head. And of course, you'll have to get the gaskets. So there's the part numbers for the gaskets. And the reason why we need to order these parts from the dealer or order the whole valve cover itself is because these seals here seal the tubes for the spark plug holes, and they're non-serviceable. For some reason, Nissan made it non-serviceable, so you have to purchase the whole valve cover. Okay, before I start taking everything apart, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little air blower here, and I'm going to blow off all the dirt and debris that's sitting on top of the valve cover, because once you take this off, all that stuff will want to fall in the engine. So get an air blower like so and just blow all around it and just blow everything out. So now I'm going to remove the air cleaner by popping the clips off, and then removing the cover here, getting the top engine cover off and the clamps here, and remove the whole air cleaner assembly and any hoses that are attached like this. Pop those off and the mass air unplug. So they're going to have rubber, after you get the two bolts out from they're going to have some rubber grommets that hold it on underneath the cap. You just lift up on them. After that, you're also going to have to remove two 10mm bolts here that hold the air cleaner part on, and after removing the clamps and the clips. Okay, so we're going to tackle the passenger side valve cover first. It's the hardest one. So we need to remove the upper plenum here. So I'm going to get started by removing the 4 Allens here on the throttle body and take that off, but I'm going to leave everything plugged in, all the hoses hooked attached to it, and just kind of set it over here. Next, I'm going to take the purge, this is the evap purge line that goes around here, goes onto the intake here. We'll take that off and set that aside here. And also on the back side, I'm going to take this vacuum line off here and just kind of set it aside. And underneath right here, there's two 12mm bolts, the support bolts to hold the nose of the intake on. Take those out too. Okay, after disconnecting all your vacuum lines and unbolting the bolts inside, you want to take a pair of needle nose pliers on the wire looms back here, squeeze these tabs and push these out. There's going to be one here and one here. Unhook those. Okay, now that you got the wire looms unplugged, right behind there is a 10mm bolt here and 10mm bolt right under here holding this bracket right here on. Go ahead and take those out, and then take the 12mm bolt here for the vacuum storage canister here and kind of just flip it out of the way. Don't unhook anything. And if you're worried about vacuum routing, you can take a picture of it with your cell phone or something like that. Or underneath the hood here is an actual vacuum diagram, so you don't have to be too concerned with how they route on this car. So go ahead and take those out. Also go ahead and unplug the electrical connector and set it aside. Okay, now we need to remove the 7 combination of nuts and bolts that go along. So there can be one here on the front, one here, one in between here, one here, one in between here, one here, and one. You have to move the wiring harness out of the way, and right there. And one of the tip I wanted to give you is having a pencil magnet like this, so you can get the bolts that are in here out. Okay, now after you got all the bolts out, what you can do is lift the intake straight up, the plenum straight up, and then now you can get access to the brake booster vacuum hose. You take that one last vacuum hose off, and then the whole intake will be free, and you can just set that aside. So as you can see, I got the upper intake off completely, and I left pretty much all the vacuum line to route it everywhere. So you don't need to mess with any of that. So now that we got the intake off, we need to start removing our coils and anything connected to the actual valve cover itself. So in this case, the injector wiring harness had these little tabs. You want to pry those out, and then you can leave the injectors plugged in. You just kind of fold it over out of your way like this. And you could do the same for the opposite side. The injector wiring harness is clipped to the valve cover. Go ahead and pop those out. There's like 3 of them, and then kind of flip the wiring harness over. But before we do that, what I want to recommend you do is take rags, or you can put masking tape or whatever you want to do, but cover up the ports on the intake here so nothing falls in while we're working on the job. So now that we got our intake sealed up, I'm going to proceed to remove all the electrical connectors for the coils and the 10mm bolts to hold the coils in, and remove the coils out. And then after, I'm going to put my focus on these brackets here and here to hold the wire loom on and stuff. And then where we're going to get to the lift the car up, the suspension up a little bit. And you can use a floor jack if you're doing this at home, so underneath on the frame here, but you want the suspension to hang down. And then if you look right through the skirt of the wheel here, you can actually see the bolts for the brackets there, and the other one you can get a little angle and you can see the bolts for the brackets in the back, and you can get to them with extensions or wobblies. So as you can see, this is my setup. So I got a long extension with a wobbly to get to the 2 bolts there, and then also this is flexible, so you can lift, kind of move it a little bit to get, and you can see the bolt, the 12mm bolt right through there. And there's one a little bit further in. Get to all 4 of those and take those out. So after getting the bolts out, and you can just set your brackets aside, disconnect your wiring harness from here and remove and unplug all your coils, and you just kind of set the wiring harness and the bracket that you took off in the back. Just kind of set that all aside like that. Next is on this little valve timing. They call it vanos. They have a couple different names for it. You want to go ahead and remove the 3 bolts for that and unplug the electrical connector and set that aside. And you're also going to need to get a new gasket for that. So now we're ready to remove this hose, this vent hose that crosses over from valve cover to valve cover. Go ahead and remove that. Most likely it's going to be really hard and break, and you may have to order this piece. But if you're lucky, you can get it off. So go ahead and take that off, and then go ahead and remove the 10 bolts that along the valve cover around the edge, and then a couple on the ends here and here. There's 10 of them total. Go ahead and remove that, and once you get the 10 bolts removed, you should be able to lift this passenger side valve cover out of the car. So when you go to take the valve cover off, it's most likely going to be pretty glued or adhered to the cylinder head. So you may have to get a little pry bar and pry it a little bit here in a couple spots where you think it's safe to pry without damaging anything. And then go ahead and lift your valve cover out. And then, so once I got this valve cover out, I got a little surprise here, and you can see that most likely a lack of maintenance here has, you can see all this oil build up, and it's really nasty. So when you run across an engine like this, my advice to you is not to break all this up and try to get it out, because what happens is it'll clog up all the ports that or clog up the screen for the oil pickup on the bottom of the engine. The only fix for this is to disassemble the whole engine and clean all this stuff out, and then basically rebuild the engine. But so if you run across this, document this, and maybe take some pictures, put this in your files at work, and then I would just clean the mating surfaces and put the new valve covers back on. And I wouldn't mess with this too much, because you'll break this stuff free, and it'll, like I said, it'll clog up all kinds of ports in the engine and cause basically catastrophic engine failure. So in this case, I'm just going to clean all the mating surfaces where the valve covers ride, clean those up really good, and then after I do that, the new valve cover, I don't have to clean the old valve cover. So if there's any parts like hoses like this, I'll just transfer those over to the new valve cover and go ahead and put the valve cover on and torque it down. So when you clean the surfaces, you want to wipe kind of away from the cylinder head. You don't want that debris falling in. Not that it's going to matter in this engine too much, but so you want to wipe away like that, and that helps keep the debris. And also in the corners here, there's probably going to be a little silicone, so you're going to use a little scraper here, and on the bottom down here, use a little scraper and get the silicone off. So now that you got your mating surfaces all cleaned up, you just want to install your new gasket into the new valve cover itself, and just all they do is they're just kind of like a press fit, and you just press them in. And then after that, we're going to put a little silicone, a little black RTV silicone in the corners, on the top and the bottom of the front of the valve cover here, or the cylinder head here. And you don't need a whole lot, just a little dab in the corners is all you need. And now we're going to reposition our valve cover back on the cylinder head and start our bolts and torque it down. One tip I wanted to show you is, after you get the valve cover on, is to take a mirror like so and put it back here, and with a flashlight you can actually check and see make sure that the gasket didn't fall off and get pinched anywhere. So you check it all the way around the whole valve cover, and then you'll put your bolts in and torque it down. Okay, now that we got our valve cover, the bolts run down when it's kind of just snug, the factory recommends that you tighten these bolts in this pattern here. So you're going to go on the passenger side, you're going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you're going to do it in 2 passes. In the first pass, you're going to do it at 17 inch-pounds, and then the second pass, you're going to do it again at 71 inch-pounds. That's the specs on that. Now on the right bank, when you do the right bank, it's pretty much here's the sequence, pretty much the same sequence as the passenger bank, and you're also going to do the same torque specs. So after getting all the cover actually torqued back down, I'm going to go ahead and put my brackets back in and reinstall these. So I'll slip these through here and kind of put them in the area, and I'll slip the back one in, just put it in the area, and then I'll lift the car up and install the bolts from underneath like the way we took them out. To make life a little easier, I went ahead and removed the wheel. That way I can get in here a little tighter. And what I did was I took paper and I put it in the socket and the bolts and started it. And I kind of went up inside like this and started my bolts. And I'll do the same thing for this bracket here. I'll run it through, and I'll start my bolts in the brackets, and then I'll tighten those 2 down. Okay, now that you got your brackets bolted back up, you can go ahead and put on your coils and plug those all back in and bolt those all back down. Okay, now you can plug in your connector for your valve timing, variable valve timing valve here, and then go ahead and tighten the 3 10mm bolts down. And that pretty much completes, after you plug in all your connectors and hoses back on, that pretty much completes the passenger side. Now we're going to put our focus on the driver side valve cover, and then after we finish the driver's valve cover, we'll put our intake back on. So to get started on the driver's side, what I'm going to do is I'm going to unhook the PCV crossover pipe on this side, remove that, and also remove the wiring harness clips that are here and here, and kind of lift the wiring harness out of the way a little bit, and go ahead and unbolt the coils, the 3 pins for the coils, and unplug the coils and move the wiring harness all out of the way. You're also going to have to unplug the oxygen sensor that goes across the valve cover, and to do that, you'll just take this little door like this and flip it up, and then pull up on it and flip it out of your way. So once you get that done, go ahead and remove the 10 bolts to hold the valve cover on. You're also going to have to remove the 3 10mm and unplug the electrical connector for the vanos here, and go ahead and remove that. And then after you got all your bolts out, then you can pry your valve cover free. And I'm going to try to pull it through without removing the fuel line here, and see if I can get it through. If I can't, then you'll have to disconnect your fuel line here and then lift it up, and then you should be able to clear everything. So I was able to get it out without removing the fuel line, but it probably would have made life easier if I would have disconnected it. So now I'm going to clean up my mating surfaces on the cylinder head, get the silicone out of the corners. Make sure you dig out all the silicone that's packed up in the corners here and here, and clean that really good. As you can see, the owner didn't do proper maintenance on this car, so they got a huge buildup of oil, burnt oil and carbon and all that stuff. So just like I said before, when we did the other side, is don't touch that stuff, just leave it be. If you try to clean it, it's going to plug something up. So we're just going to clean the mating surfaces and then transfer any parts. So we're going to transfer any parts that didn't come with the new cover, the cap and the bolt here for where the air cleaner snaps on, or the engine cover. We'll transfer those over, put our new gaskets in, and put it back in the car. Alright, after getting our mating surfaces clean, we put a little dab of silicone in the corners here, and reinstalling our new gasket in the new valve cover here. Go ahead and slip it back in and start all the bolts. Just like we did before, but after we get our valve cover on, is we want to check with our mirror and check around the edge of the gasket, make sure that nothing all the way around, and make sure that none of the gaskets slip off in the process of installing it. And if everything's good, put your bolts in and torque it down to the same sequence as we did on the passenger side. Refer back to that diagram. So now that the valve cover is fully torqued down, go ahead and reinstall your coil packs. Go ahead and reinstall your vanos and tighten this down, plug it in. And any of the wire looms that you took out, whatever, go ahead and plug those all back in. Any hoses that you may have taken off in the process. And the oxygen sensor, after that's all plugged in and done, then we're gonna do is that pretty much completes the valve cover part of this. Now we need to put the intake back on. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna carefully pull my rags back out and clean all my mating surfaces where the intake goes, and change my gaskets on my intake manifold, the plenum gaskets. And then I will look down on each port with a flashlight and make sure that nothing fell in, and if anything did, fish it out now. So the intake manifold gaskets are just these, the plenum gaskets I should say, are just these little rubber O-rings. So just go ahead and pop those out. And with your fingers or a little flat blade screwdriver, pop those out, and then install your new ones, and then we're gonna slip this back on. So what I did was I'm gonna set it in here like this, kind of just cocked in there after changing the gaskets, and then put your brake booster vacuum hose on first. So go ahead and put that on first, and then you can slide it in there and put it over the studs. And okay, now that you got the intake pretty much over the studs that it went on, you can go ahead and start your bolts and nuts and bolts and run them down. I believe there's 7 bolts. And then here I have a little diagram, and this is going to show you which order to torque them down. So this would be the front of the car. So you're going to torque it down like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you're going to torque the nuts, the ones with the nuts on it, with the studs. They're going to be torqued down to 8 foot-pounds, and the bolts are torqued down to about 5 foot-pounds. So go ahead and torque that down. Okay, after you get your intake torqued down, you go ahead and put the bracket back on with the 2 10mm bolts, and go ahead and pop your wire looms back through. And after that, you can rebolt down the vacuum canister here, bolt that down and torque it down, and plug in your electrical connector for the vacuum switch. After getting that done, you want to plug in your PCV hose that goes onto the intake here. Plug that in, put the clamp back on, and then we're going to put the 2 bolts that held the nose bracket here on. So we're going to put those 2 bolts in and tighten those down. After that, we're going to change the seal and put our throttle body, bolt our throttle body back up. To start these 2 bolts, I had to loosen this bracket. I had to go back on through the fender well here and loosen up this bracket just a couple threads, just to get a little bit of play to line everything up. So you may have to do that too. Things change and shift when you put these things back together and back and forth. So go ahead and start these 2 bolts that are here and here, and tighten those down, and then go back under and tighten up the bottom 2 bolts. So now that the throttle body's all bolted up and the brackets are bolted on the side, we're going to put our hose back on for the purge valve. We'll go ahead and plug that back on, and we'll put the air cleaner back on. So after putting your air boot back on, tighten the clamp here, putting the 2 10mm bolts that held the whole cleaner assembly on, putting your vent line on and securing it, and plugging your mass airflow sensor back in and locking down your air cleaner. Now we need to put the top cover back on. So the top cover has these little rubber grommets on the bottom side here. They just go over these bolts here, and they just push on. So you're gonna put it on where it lines up at once you find the bolts, and you'll just push it on and push it on, and then you'll put your 2 bolts here and here on and tighten those down. And that's how you change valve covers on a 2005 Nissan Xterra. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive, and I'd like to thank you for watching my videos, and remind you to subscribe, and thank you again.